Helping you make the most of your retirement. This is the Retirement Years Podcast. Here are your hosts, Mary Ellen French and Dave Wing.
Hi there, I'm Mary Ellen.
And I'm Dave, and today we'll talk about the transition from parenting children to being the parent of a young adult. And in an article in Psychology Today, June of 2023, the following describes a person who is an emerging adult. They are generally between the ages of 18 and 29, and both those points can have, obviously, that's just the cluster. And this is when many people have a break from adult responsibilities, just a little break to explore love and life. Oh, I remember those times. Emerging adults are optimistic, but experience instability and feeling in between adolescence and adulthood. And finally, emerging adults often learn a lot about themselves through romantic relationships. So that sort of self-awareness, self-discovery.
Yeah.
Research on emerging adult aims to understand how young people coordinate a lot of priorities at once. And I mean, we can think, well, what are their priorities? What are their responsibilities? Well, they're navigating education, love interests, career choices, and the research looks at how they cope with that and that slippery feeling of transitioning, maybe with a little fearfulness, hopefully not dread, to adulthood.
Right. Yeah, there's also lots of a fairly substantial body of research in the area of what it looks like to be the parent of an emerging adult, or even adult children, because really we're into the third decade of the 2000s, which is
I know.
Right? Yeah. And frankly, it is a lot different for young adults now than it was when we were our kids' age.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, with our oldest, I had a chance to go away on the weekend with him, and we were talking about it. It was eye-opening for him that I and you are likely the last generation to grow up without social media.
Yeah.
Because computers weren't really common in households till the early 1990s.
Yeah.
So it's just taken for granted for that generation. And I think the experiences and pressures on them are severely impacted by that access to social media. Not all of it great, that's for sure. But when I think back to, if you think where I was and where my children are now, it was around the same age in regards to getting into post-secondary education.
Yeah.
Quite a surprise I got into any. And then one of the big differences, I was pretty much living away from home full-time around age 18, if not much later than that. Because as soon as I started college and then went on to university, it was pretty much living away and coming home now and then. I started a career right after, had my own car that I'd paid for, was paying my own rent, all of those things, because it just seemed that maybe there was a more affordability, I suppose, at the time as well. And we know financial independence isn't as easy now for emerging adults in this generation. The affordability is just simply not there. And the thought of, like, within 3 or 4 years of my career, purchased a house with a mortgage, but purchased it nonetheless. And that's not even attainable for many emerging adults till late 20s, early 30s, maybe, I would think in some cases. And we have to come to grips, you and I and our generation, about they aren't hurrying headlong into some decisions. They're looking around. They'll start a career, but change a career. They're doing those things, finding their way. And that takes a certain amount of courage that we didn't experience when we were younger. And that different timeline is, as we'll discuss today, is impacting the relationship between parent and emerging adult child or adult child that sometimes is coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, like you said, when graduating high school, like there was no question. When I was graduating high school, my parents assumed, and therefore I had to assume that I was going to attend some post-secondary institution straight out of high school, right? And from my parents' perspective, it needed to be something practical that led to a good job that they presumed I would have for life, and that it would include benefits, and I would be set, and they wouldn't have to worry about me anymore. That's really what it was. And I contrast that with my own kids who are in their, one's 23 and one's going to be turning 25. And my 23-year-old, for example, he chose not to pursue post-secondary because he wisely didn't want to spend the money when he had no idea what he wanted to study,
Yeah.
let alone what he wants to do for a living. And yeah, he's been living in our basement, and he also left for a year to live with friends those friends were going to post-secondary, even though he wasn't. And it was a fantastic experience for him. Like, he just learned so much. He came back a much better roommate, I have to say, housemate. And now he's about to start a job across the country that he's very excited about. And, as his parents, we've never worried about how he's going to turn out or whether or not he'll ever be financially secure. We're just confident that he will.
Yeah.
He's going to forge his own path. We're here to love him and support him with whatever that journey looks like. But it's such a different journey than mine was.
Yeah, and Mary Ellen, I laugh when you mention about the practicality of our parents, and the purpose of post-secondary was to have, employable skills. And my first choice was I guess for some of our listeners, would be called a community college.
Yeah.
And I went into a 2-year program for radio broadcasting. Not very practical in the eyes of my parents. And so when they found out I got into what I affectionately know as the Harvard of the North, Queen's University in Kingston, as a mature student, little asterisk there.
Yeah.
A little one. They were so proud. And then when I told them that my Bachelor of Arts would be in drama, I could read the failure in their face. It was there. I felt it because it wasn't particularly employable. And so then I did the only logical thing and got into teaching.
Yeah.
And if there's anywhere where acting skills come in handy, it's facing children all day.
Yeah.
And not letting them know what's really on your mind.
Uh-huh.
Now, for today's topic, admittedly, some of our listeners may not have adult children or emerging adult children.
Yep.
Chances are, though, they're friends with somebody that does.
Mm-hmm.
And, the conversation will turn to, what are your kids doing? How are they doing? Are they children? Those sorts of things. And that's where today's guest comes in, because when we think about when those questions come up, where should my children be? Like, you do kind of think that in the back of your mind. Today's guest, Gill Tillmann, lives in Barrie, Ontario, and is a life transition coach. And we found that very interesting since the theme of our season is transitions. And turns out she was a wonderful guest, as you'll hear in a moment. The book she wrote was Pour the Wine. We're talking about our adult children again. And here's what she had to say about the transition to that stage of life when you realize the relationship you used to have with your children as their parent is not the one you have now.
So, Gill, welcome to the Retirement Years podcast. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen and Dave. I'm so excited to be here.
So, Gill, tell our audience a little bit about your background and how you became interested in pursuing a career as a life transition coach.
So the word transition features huge in my life. I've really come to acknowledge that life is a series of transitions. Last week, my daughter said to me, "Mom, I've just realized you've reinvented yourself quite a few times." And I said, "Yes, I have." I began my post-educational, well, never post-educational, but I began my career as a high school teacher. And even in the world of high school, I was interested more in the students that had bigger transitions to make in their lives. So I started in an alternative school with students that had no other high schools to go to. They'd been kicked out of them all.
Right.
And, or they were there by a court order that they were forced to return back to school. So these students were really focused on transitions.
Yeah.
After that career, I became a development coordinator, which is a fancy name really for saying fundraiser for a woman's transitional home.
Mm.
And this was women who were at a point in their life where they were unhoused mothers. They were leading the life of poverty, but they were all seeking to become more independent and to become women who could stand on their own feet and move into a new way of being, a new way of living.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my second career. And the life coach, I didn't even know such a thing existed. So when we talk about not knowing what we don't know, just a very brief conversation with someone telling me that they were a lawyer, but because they were giving so much information to young people, they wanted to have some skills, tools, and strategies to assist these young people as they made choices and perhaps transitioned into law. And after that conversation, I immediately came home and was so excited and did my research on various coaching schools. And I found one in Toronto. And so I became a life transition coach. And I think my life has always been about embracing change, facing change head on, whether it's a change you've chosen or a change that's been thrust upon you. So that's how I got to the life transition coach title.
Okay. Cool.
So Jill, then it appears that you're not someone who lets a lot of moss get under your feet. In the fall of last year, a book came out that you authored, and we love the title. Pour the Wine. We're talking about our adult children again.
Yes.
And obviously something motivated you to write that book. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about the background of that, like what made you do it and how that journey went?
First of all, just given my background, I was really floored when my husband and I were having a time of confusion and frustration in building relationships with our adult children. We have 3 adult children. After post-secondary and during post-secondary, they never lived in the same cities. The 3 of them chose different post-secondary institutes to attend.
Right.
They sought 3 very different styles of living. And currently, I have my youngest in Seattle, my middle is in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, and my third goes between Vietnam and Thailand and lives the life of just travel and really escaped the whole way of North American living. And my husband and I, during the time as they were finding their own footing, we were really struggling to find our footing.
Yeah.
We didn't know when to lean in. You know, when you struggle and you go like, oh, should I help out here? Am I supposed to be giving them money? Did they ask for money? Are we supposed to welcome them home? Should we be offering it to them or wait until they ask? So we just called it a life of walking on eggshells. And it was a very stressful place to be.
Yeah.
And it made it difficult for the 2 of us because we would always be asking one another, like, do you think you gave too much? Do you think we didn't give enough, or were they asking for more? So in that time, I just really had to stop and take a look at what was going on with me, with us. And I made the first error that humans make, and that is to compare to the way other families were functioning.
Yeah.
And to the way other children in this adult stage were functioning.
Yeah.
So looking around, I would see other people and their kids were moving home and they were getting jobs, and some of them were having babies, and they were in that very traditional stream of life. And part of us would go, oh yeah, that's the right way to do it. That's the way that, we had expected. That's the way we had anticipated. But it was not so. So in my own personal frustrations, I did seek a psychotherapist. Luckily, she was also a friend. And at her encouragement, I became a little more vulnerable with my friends and started sharing my story and discussing their stories. And many of them had children who were now living at home. They thought that they had been launched which is one of our favorite terms.
Yeah.
We're expecting to launch our children. Many of them were at home. I spoke with people who had children in their basement, and it's that story of my kids in the basement all day. They're playing video games. I have no idea what they do. They don't have a job. So the frustrations levels really varied. Some were just like, oh, my daughter never picks up the phone, or she doesn't respond to my texts. And then you can have another child who will say, would you quit texting me every day? So not only did we have very different problems, but each child had very different wishes, expectations of how we should be working. So the book really was sharing these experiences, helping people to enter into conversations in a safe space, which often meant a veranda or a coffee table sitting sipping wine.
Mm-hmm.
So hence the title, Pour the Wine, because these conversations happen in comfortable places where you feel safe to be vulnerable.
And that's one of the things that I really loved about the book, Gill, is that I could really picture you sitting around with what I think you called your sisterhood of mothers.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And I could really picture that in the when I was reading the book. But I was also struck by the fact that you did some research as well, right? And so, tell us a little bit about what the research has to say about what the research calls emerging adults. And also, what does the research have to say about us as the parents of those emerging adults?
So just let me start with what the research says about the parents, because it's actually quite simple. One, they say adult children do indeed love their parents, but parents are more interested, have more invested in their children than the children do in the relationship with the parents. So that puts my mind at ease that I understand that my worries and my confusion are something that I have to deal with myself.
Right.
Because although the children want it, they are not invested as heavily as we are.
Right.
So that's what the research shows. As far as these emerging adults, a lot of times I thought, like, is it just me? Is it only my kids? But no, this statistically is a stage of life that the term emerging adult was coined in 2000. So it's sort of within the last 25 years, things have changed and were first noticed 25 years ago. That all of the psychosocial developmental theories, and first year psychology class, we can remember here are the 6 stages of psychosocial development. And now they felt they actually have to tuck in another little stage, and that this stage initially, they used the years 19 to 30. But what they're finding is 30 is a very loose end to that stage.
Yeah.
And the research has shown recently that this time of life is extended on average 5 years. So marriage is 5 years later. The first job is 5 years later. The first child is 5 years later. So that's just on average, it's 5 years. And it may even take a young adult to turn into the next stage of psychosocial development, which is a stage where they have discovered intimacy and a sense of self. And it may be as late as 40. So the issue is, as parents, we're like, come on, get a job already. Oh my goodness. And I don't care if you're married to have a baby, just have one. There's lots of options out there for having a child. So it is a longer period of time, and the choices that they have in this period of self-discovery are very different than our choices were. And it's a very different time. So, Marianne, back to the parent part.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing the research does say is that parents will, when we take a look, we do have to acknowledge and accept that these are very different times.
Mm-hmm.
And one researcher I read, he basically said, scrap all of our experiences because they are in no way similar to what this generation is going through as they come to find their independent life.
And that makes sense to me, given, the stage that I see both of my emerging adult children at, right? One is about to turn 23 and the other one's 24 and a half. And yeah, I get that, right? It's if I can give up any expectations and if I can give up remembering what it was like for me, because my life at their age was so different than their lives are now. And
Yes.
that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
And
advice.
it is okay, but
Yeah.
it is quite different. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jill, I would say, yeah, I think on sort of intellectually, one can acknowledge that our past experiences were so different, thus how could they be relevant? However, you're still going to get the stories about when I was a kid, we walked uphill both ways to school and
Yeah.
carried our own wood, and there's always going to be that. It is easier said than done, but thus why you read a book like yours, and
That's
see if
right.
you can't maybe expand beyond, well, that's the way I did it, and you're going to suffer too, or you're a failure because you didn't do what I did by a certain age. I think that's an excellent message. If someone takes away almost nothing else, that would be an important start. And you mentioned in your book that adult children, emerging adults, which I've been called that, but in a less flattering term. But emerging adults and their parents have to develop a new type of relationship. And that's obviously part of the purpose of the book, and that's mentioned in there. And to help with that, there's excellent tools and strategies near the end of the book that help support both sides. And what are some of the new ways of communicating that we can do as parents of emerging adults or adult kids that we could try?
I think it's really important. Just what you said, Dave, was that our expectations really color our relationships.
Yeah.
And what is most surprising to me is that often we don't understand our own expectations until we're faced with something that goes outside of our expectations. And then we realize, like, oh, wait a minute. I thought I would have been a grandparent by now, or I thought I would have had 2 employed children by now.
Yeah.
So the way in which we communicate with our children really has to be built on us understanding our own selves, being more self-aware, and recognizing, and even in our conversation saying to our children, before we even talk, I just want you to know, I had expectations, and for me, these are the expectations I may have had, and I want you to know it may color my thinking, but it's not going to enter into this conversation. I'm going to be aware of it, and I'm going to try and speak to and listen to understand. And one of my favorite quotes is Stephen Covey saying that most people listen to respond rather than listening to understand.
Yes.
And that's where we are at with our adult children, is our conversations, first of all, need to be very proactive. So around holidays, around get-togethers, around meals, these conversations can be quite simple, but it is just, what were your expectations? When we were able to be with our children on a holiday, And we sat down at the table when we arrived at this ski chalet that we were at and asked, what is it that everyone wants to do this week? And we threw down the ideas on the table and then we ranked them. And everybody ranked what they wanted to do. And part of that saves difficult conversations to come. Like, well, what did you expect? Of course, we're going to be eating at 9 o'clock at night because 5 of us were in the kitchen at the same time. But having those conversations, having the preparedness for the get together and for the event is really important. The perfect time to have that is when you have a child who's coming home, whether it's for a holiday or whether it's children who are moving back home. So many parents and with their adult children have difficult times because they have not been proactive in their conversations. They haven't been truthful about their expectations of how the space was to be used, how the meals were to be prepared, whether there was a rent to be paid, who has responsibility for cleaning different areas. There are very simple boundaries that can be set. And I certainly would like to address boundaries, but as far as changing the conversation, a lot of it is just being aware of your expectations and setting them up front and having those conversations early.
Great advice.
The other part of the conversation is the language that you choose to use, and even the difference between being a parent and parenting. Are we parenting these adult children? And if we can put ourselves into a mindset where we understand we are a parent, we are dealing with adults. And that in and of itself, just changing that whole, flipping that paradigm is, I am a parent, true, these are adults. I am not parenting anymore. Right. I may be a mentor. I may be a guide. There's some other way of being that is not parenting your children. So that's a big part of the conversation and the communication that you have, is knowing who you are as you come to the table with your adult.
I was really struck, Jill, by the neighbor mindset in the book, right? So, if you're having a chat with your neighbor over the fence, you would never say to them, "Oh, why on earth did you rip out all those flowers? That must have cost you so much money." You would not say that to your neighbor, but it comes out of our mouths so easily when we're talking to our adult children. And yeah, if you could just have that mindset of, oh, well, how would I speak to any other adult?
Correct.
Who was not my child, and, have that lens on when you're having a conversation with your adult child.
Yeah. And one of the big takeaways in communication is thinking of the long game. So is it, the one example I have in the book is of a dad, and he told me himself, he said, I'm looking around the house going, oh my gosh, they painted all that beautiful woodwork white. And we giggled as soon as he said it, because we know in the long run, what does that matter? It doesn't have any relevance to them. And I said, okay, are you up on fashion? Because that changes. Home decor changes every 5 years. One time it's paint it, the next time it's strip it down and make it bare. So really, the coming into the conversation, I'm with an adult, I want to think of the long game.
Yeah.
What matters that is still going to be effective and relevant 2 years from now, 3 years from now? What difference will it make if I express my opinion on how I think it should be or how I expected it would be?
There were so many pearls of wisdom in this book, Jill, and I got that, some of them were from your own life and some of them were shared with you by others. What would be sort of the biggest takeaway that you hope readers will get from this book if they are parents of adult children?
One of the things I wrote the book specifically to have people share. So at the end of the book, I do provide resources that I've used, and I also provided some discussion questions. I think sometimes people, when they're in a book club, they find it's a very safe space. So and a lot of those experiences were with women that I share a book club with. So the idea of being vulnerable,
Yeah.
being open to sharing, that we are not alone, and this is for real, was really important takeaway. Another takeaway that I think was important is setting boundaries, and the change in the outlook around boundaries for us is the boundary is for us, and it does not mean that our children, our adults that we're dealing with, have to do anything. And that's the key to the boundary. Is it something that we do and we know we've set the boundary? And it can be as simple as, I'll just give the being together as a family. We're going out for dinner, and do I feel comfortable footing the bill? So it's not saying, okay, everybody, you all have to pay your own bill. It's setting a boundary and saying, tonight I will or will not pay for the bill. And then that can be communicated openly, but it's not ordering them to do something. It's just
Right.
knowing where you have set your line in the sand.
Yeah.
So that's really the takeaway is to share, to come to have more self-awareness about what you are expecting, what lenses are you looking at them through, what preconceived notions do you have of what's coming. Be aware of that. Keep yourself safe through setting your own boundaries, but do share, because they're fun relationships. They're great relationships to have. And, someone wrote that you love spending time with your children because it's an extension of who you are. I mean, they're an extension of who we are and how we've lived. And so, yes, I love skiing with my kids. I taught them to ski so that we would still have these times together as adults. So it's something to take away, is to remember, what do you want to be doing in the long term together, and really hold that close, because they're great relationships and they have so much to offer us.
They do. They do. And I am really excited about this stage of my relationship with my kids. And as we transition into like you said, I'm still their parent. I'll always be their parent, but I'm no longer needed for parenting. And yeah, I'm really excited about this stage personally with my own two kids. So Jill, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I hope everybody picks up this book, because I got to tell you, I'm going to be sharing this with my emerging adult kids, because I think they're going to learn a little something about me as well from reading this book. So I actually think this is a great book for any age to be reading, to really get a perspective on what this time and this stage of life looks like for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can pour wine together.
Exactly. I can pour wine with them.
That's great. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed our time together.
So I loved talking with Jill. The background on how I even discovered her book is that I went for coffee with a friend that I hadn't seen in quite some time, and she had read Jill's book. And she said to me at the beginning of our coffee date, okay, here's the challenge. I've just read this book, and my challenge is that neither one of us is allowed to talk about our adult kids during our coffee date. And I went, sure, no problem. I don't think I lasted 5 minutes, and one of my kids' names started to come to my lips. And I'm like, oh, this is much harder than I think.
Yeah.
And like, I was completely unaware until that day just how much I talk about my kids. Sorry, my emerging adult children. Like, I
Right.
just was not aware.
Well, and I've always thought of that ought to be your your crowning moment, your achievement of anything else in the world, it's our children. So of course, we think everyone else shares our interest and will be held rapt as we talk about what has happened. And it's their own fault if they ask. So it was interesting to hear Jill talk about how the research shows that major life events and some of the psychosocial stages of development are happening later in life. And the general agreement is it's around 5 years. So whatever was happening to you and I back in the day would be about 5 years later. And I think it's that at least.
Mhm.
And then Jill points out that some young adults may reach the age of 40 to fully discover their sense of self. And yeah, that's, everyone's an individual, right? And if it's taking that length of time, like I admire what your son's doing about, well, I didn't want to just rush off and take some degree or a community college course, whatever that I wasn't interested in, only because I felt the pressure to go, because
Yeah.
now is the time. It's better to probably take a little time and slow down. None of that might be what's right for you.
No.
All of that to say, I guess, that as a parent of an individual who's no longer a child, we need to be patient. And most of all, and it doesn't always come back to that open line of communication, because they still need you.
Hmm.
They would hate it if you just said, well, you're on your own, but just maybe setting aside what we think is where we should be or what we should be doing, and listening to their needs.
Well, yeah, listening is really the key, isn't it? I mean, first and foremost, we need to love them still. That's not going to change. We loved them from the minute they were born, and we're going to continue to love them until the day that hopefully we die and not them.
Right.
But the listening and the asking questions, as opposed to the offering of advice, I think was key in what Jill had to say, right? Like, unless you're asked for advice, don't give it. She used the analogy of the neighbor over the fence, right? You wouldn't dream of giving your neighbor advice on how to set up their barbecue or where to put
No,
the plants in the back. You would not do that.
no.
So why do we do it to our adult children? And it's because we still see them as children. We don't see them as adults. So, and that's not to say that we can't offer assistance to our adult children. We can, but we just want to be conscious that it's free of manipulation, I'm going to say, right? Like, you're not going to say, for example, I'll pay for your second post-secondary degree if you promise to come home for Christmas for the next 4 years. Like, that's not how you want to be with your adult children. It's really not how you want to be with anybody.
Yeah. Continuing along with Jill's advice, and to be clear, the book is not an advice book. It's stories and reflections that you can glean information from and say, you know what, that makes perfect sense. Because that's what we're talking about, the things that make sense that are reflected in the book. And you really need to know in this relationship who you are, and accept that what you did, where you were at a certain age, all that things, all those are wonderful, but your emerging adult children in today's situation may be in wildly different places. And doesn't it feel good when they do want you to support them? And so if you want that relationship to be a bit of a give and take, you better also not put pressure on them because of what you did or at what stage you were working and buying a house and
Right.
those sorts of things. And at our age, we had, as you mentioned, and we both mentioned earlier, we had very different experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I loved about her book was all the anecdotes. Like, there's so many stories in there about parents talking about their kids and what it is their kids are up against. And Jill's really organized the book well around certain themes that emerged out of all the various conversations that she's had, around a campfire or across a dinner table or whatever. And so it's, it's really an easy read. And one of my favorite parts at the back of the book is a lovely list of tools and strategies that she's called the listy thing.
Mm.
And it really is, that's really where the gold of the advice comes in, is near the end of the book. And some of them are listen, be a friend, stay curious, bite your tongue. Really like that one. Know the cost of your opinions. Right. And that speaks to what you were saying a minute ago. hold family round table meetings. And she talks more about that in the book. And that I've implemented that one here in our house. And boy, that's made a difference. And accept that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that I think there's a lot of merit in this book. I'm so glad she wrote it. I could really relate to most of it. And it's fantastic.
Well, and I think one of the most positive things that come out of it as well is the description of those supports that can be there, that are already there. Maybe you didn't take advantage of them. And the most obvious one is the sisterhood of mothers.
Yeah.
That kind of was the genesis of this book, about
Yeah.
talking over a glass of wine or a coffee or whatever you prefer. And I think that's important, to lean on friends a bit and talk to them, or, just to commiserate a bit, I guess. You can do your own reading. It's the world's at our fingertips. You can go find information on emerging adults or today's generation, whatever you want to Google, and you'll find ways to relate.
Yeah.
And some things you can try. And of course, including reading things like Jill's book. Always there's the option of a therapist, or, as we'll hear a little bit later on in the season, we have some life coaches at different transitions of your life that we'll be interviewing. Mm-hmm. They're wonderful people to talk to and challenge you to come up with strategies to either change or change your thinking. The only thing that I would highlight is what Jill did as well, and that's that don't get into a comparison that somebody else's kids are doing whatever, or they're already a supervisor, or whatever it happens to be. Don't put that on your kids. Just you didn't raise them to copy somebody else, and they certainly would be disappointed if that's how you're judging them. But yeah, not to get into that. Well, so-and-so's kids are already, well, good for them.
Yeah.
But just support your kids. If you did your job, they'll get there.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. So listeners, we hope that you enjoyed today's episode. We certainly enjoyed reading Jill's book. And again, it's Pour the Wine. We're talking about our adult children again. Mm-hmm. And we enjoyed talking with Jill about the book. So we encourage you to pick up a copy of Jill's book, which is available on Amazon. And we encourage you to check out our Instagram. In our Instagram, we have a contest running the week that this episode airs. And we will randomly draw one of the people who sends us a DM in response to having listened to this episode the week that it airs.
Right.
And I've already purchased a copy for my girlfriend. I'm going to go visit her when we drive our son out west to this new job. And she is the mother of 3 amazing young women. And I know that we are going to be talking about them and my 2 when we get together, and we will be sharing a glass or 2 of wine.
I highly recommend it. And once again, we thank everyone for listening to this week's episode and for sharing your love of our podcast with others, because that's how it gets around, is word of mouth, and somebody takes a listen, and hopefully if it's right for them and they find it fun and informative, they'll listen along as well. And we hope that you'll take time to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and that you'll consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next week when we speak with a hypnotherapist who helps older adults with the difficult transition from being married to being divorced. So until then, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mary Ellen. Stay well.
For additional content, visit our website or follow us on Twitter at Retirement Years, and on Instagram and Facebook at the Retirement Years Podcast. Our email address is theretirementyearspodcast@gmail.com.